Fix my Porsche, and I'll marry you." The words landed like a joke across the quiet garage, followed by a wave of laughter that echoed beneath the fluorescent lights. Victoria Sterling stood beside her midnight blue Porsche 911 GT3, a billionaire CEO surrounded by polished executives, expensive watches, and people who were used to saying yes before she finished speaking. Across from her stood Ethan Walker, a single father wearing a faded work shirt, worn jeans, and a pair of hands marked by years of honest work. He did not laugh. He did not get offended. He simply looked at the car, then looked back at her with calm eyes that carried something the room did not understand. The garage smelled of motor oil, warm metal, and old memories. Outside, the afternoon sun stretched across the small American town, where people knew Ethan as the quiet mechanic who arrived early, worked hard, and always left enough time to pick up his 9-year-old daughter from school. To everyone watching, he was just another man fixing cars to pay the bills. Victoria tilted her head with a confident smile. "Well, is the challenge too big?" A few employees chuckled softly. One of her assistants whispered, "This should be interesting." Ethan wiped his hands with a cloth and walked toward the Porsche. "A car usually tells you what is wrong," he said quietly. "You just have to listen." The laughter faded slightly. He opened the hood and studied the engine. He did not rush. He did not try to impress anyone. He moved with the patience of someone who respected the machine in front of him. Victoria watched carefully, expecting a simple guess or a lucky answer. She had met hundreds of people who wanted her approval. Investors wanted her money. Employees wanted her attention. Strangers wanted her influence. But this man seemed completely uninterested in proving anything. After several minutes, Ethan stepped back. "Your engine is not the problem." Victoria raised an eyebrow. "Then what is?" Ethan looked at the dashboard and pointed toward the system display. Someone changed the performance settings. The car is protecting itself because it thinks there is a problem that does not exist. The room became quieter. One of Victoria's engineers stepped forward, smiling politely. "That is impossible. Our diagnostics would have caught that." Ethan nodded. "They would have, if they were looking for it." His voice was gentle, never arrogant. That was what surprised everyone most. He was not trying to win. He was simply telling the truth. Victoria looked at him differently now. For the first time, she saw beyond the old work boots and the simple clothes. There was a confidence that money could not buy, a quiet strength that did not need an audience. She had walked into the garage expecting to entertain herself for a few minutes. She had no idea she had just met the one person who would change the way she saw success, respect, and the meaning of a second chance. And no one in that garage knew that the man standing beside her Porsche was connected to a secret that would soon leave the entire room in silence. The next morning began quietly in the small town of Willow Creek, where the sound of an old alarm clock was often louder than the world outside. At 5:30 in the morning, Ethan Walker was already awake. The kitchen light above him flickered softly as he prepared breakfast before the day began. A small lunchbox sat on the counter, carefully packed with his daughter's favorite sandwich and a handwritten note reminding her to have a good day. For most people, success was measured by company buildings, expensive cars, or the number of people who knew their name. But for Ethan, success was the smile of his 9-year-old daughter, Lily, when she ran through the front door after school. "Daddy, are we still going to the park this weekend?" Lily asked, holding her backpack against her chest. Ethan smiled as he poured orange juice in her cup. "If the weather stays clear, I promise." He knew promises mattered. After losing his wife years earlier, he had learned that children remembered the little moments more than the expensive things. A warm meal, a bedtime story, a parent who always showed up. Those were the things that built a home. At the garage, Ethan returned to the same routine he had followed for years. The same old tools, the same cracked concrete floor, the same customers who trusted him because he fixed problems without making people feel small. His coworkers knew him as the quiet mechanic who never complained. They did not know that before this life, Ethan had worked in places where millions of dollars depended on his decisions. They did not know that his mind could see patterns in machines the way some people saw colors. Ethan had chosen silence, not because he had nothing to say but because he had already spent years chasing recognition and discovered that peace was worth more. Later that afternoon, the garage door opened and Victoria Sterling stepped inside again. The room changed instantly. People stood straighter. Conversations became quieter. Everyone knew who she was. The CEO of Sterling Automotive Group. A woman whose company had transformed the luxury vehicle industry. She walked toward Ethan, holding a folder in her hand. "I have a few questions," she said. Ethan looked up from a vehicle he was repairing. "About the Porsche?" She nodded. "About how you knew." Ethan placed the tool down carefully. "I paid attention." Victoria studied him for a moment. That answer surprised her more than a complicated explanation would have. In her world, people always wanted credit. They wanted recognition, awards, and headlines. Ethan only wanted the problem solved. "Most people would have taken the opportunity to show off," Victoria said. Ethan gave a small smile. "Most problems get worse when people care more about being noticed than fixing them." The word stayed with her. Outside, the afternoon wind moved through the quiet streets. Inside the garage, something began to change. Victoria had spent years surrounded by brilliant people, but many of them were searching for something from her. Ethan was different. He was not impressed by her wealth. He was not intimidated by her position. He simply treated her like another person. And for the first time in a long time, Victoria wondered who Ethan Walker really was, because behind the quiet eyes of a single father was a story that had remained hidden for far too long. Victoria Sterling had spent her entire life surrounded by people who measured everything by numbers, revenue, market share, stock prices, company growth. In her world, every decision had a value attached to it. Every person had a reason for standing beside her. But Ethan Walker had done something she rarely experienced. He helped her without expecting anything in return. That simple act bothered her more than she wanted to admit. The following afternoon, Victoria returned to the garage with 3 engineers from Sterling Automotive Group. The polished shoes and expensive jackets looked completely out of place against the dusty floor and old tool cabinets. Ethan noticed immediately, but he continued working. "Mr. Walker," one of the engineers said, looking around with a slight smile, "we just want to understand your method." Ethan set down his wrench. "There is no special method. You listen to the machine, and you follow the evidence." The engineer opened his tablet. "Our system showed no issue with the performance settings." Ethan nodded. "Your system checked what it was programmed to check." The room became quiet. Victoria watched the exchange carefully. She expected Ethan to become defensive. She expected him to prove himself. Instead, he remained calm. That calmness was becoming impossible to ignore. "Can you show us?" Victoria asked. Ethan walked toward the Porsche. He opened the diagnostic panel and connected a simple scanner. The engineers watched closely. Numbers appeared across the screen. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Then Ethan pointed to a small change in the system data. "This adjustment was made recently." One engineer leaned closer. "That is just a performance calibration." Ethan shook his head gently. "No, it is a temporary adjustment designed to hide another issue." Victoria looked at the engineers. "Is that possible?" They exchanged uncertain looks. Nobody answered immediately. Ethan continued working, not because he wanted attention, but because he wanted the truth. The garage lights reflected across the Porsche's polished surface as the quiet mechanic uncovered what a team of professionals had missed. Finally, one engineer looked at the data again and whispered, "How did you see that so quickly?" Ethan stepped away from the car. "Experience." That single word carried more weight than a long explanation. Victoria noticed something about him in that moment. Ethan was not trying to defeat anyone. He was not trying to embarrass the people who doubted him. He simply cared about doing the job correctly. Later that evening, Victoria sat alone in her office overlooking the city. The lights outside reflected against the glass walls of the building she had spent years creating. She opened a report about Ethan Walker. The information was surprisingly limited. A small garage worker, a single father, a quiet life. But something did not make sense. People with ordinary skills did not solve complex engineering problems with such natural understanding. She looked again at the picture attached to the file. Ethan standing beside his old truck. A simple smile. A worn work shirt. A man who seemed completely comfortable being unnoticed. For the first time in years, Victoria felt curious instead of certain. She had built an empire by finding talented people. But Ethan was different. His greatest ability was not hidden because he lacked confidence. It was hidden because he had chosen humility. And somewhere beneath the surface of that quiet life was a truth Victoria had not discovered yet. A truth that would soon change everything she thought she knew about the man standing in the small-town garage. The next morning, the small garage in Willow Creek felt different. The same old tools hung on the same wooden wall. The same sunlight passed through the dusty windows. But something had changed. People were no longer looking at Ethan Walker like he was just the man who fixed their tires and changed their oil. They were beginning to wonder who he really was. Victoria Sterling arrived before noon, not with a team of executives or a room full of assistants, but alone. That alone surprised Ethan. She stepped inside carrying a small folder and looked around the garage with new eyes. Yesterday, she had seen a simple repair shop. Today, she saw a place where someone with extraordinary knowledge had chosen to live quietly. You know, most people would have told me exactly who they were, Victoria said. Ethan looked up from the vehicle he was working on. Most people have their reasons. She placed the folder on the counter. Inside were technical documents from Sterling Automotive Group. I want your opinion. Ethan glanced at the papers, but did not immediately reach for them. Why mine? Victoria posed. It was a simple question, but it made her think. Most people asked what they could gain from working with her. Ethan asked why she trusted him. Because you saw something my engineers missed, she answered. Ethan opened the folder. The documents showed a new vehicle design that her company planned to introduce within the year. He studied the pages quietly. Minutes passed. Victoria watched his expression, searching for any sign of excitement or hesitation. Instead, she saw patience. The same patience she had noticed when he worked on her Porsche. There's a problem, Ethan finally said. Victoria leaned forward. Where? He pointed to the design. The system is powerful, but is trying too hard to be perfect. Sometimes the best machines are not the ones with the most power. They are the ones that understand balance. The words were simple, but they carried a deeper meaning. Victoria looked at the design again. She had spent millions of dollars creating a vehicle that represented innovation. Yet this man had noticed a weakness in minutes. How did you learn to see things like this? She asked. Ethan closed the folder. For a moment, the garage became completely quiet. The sound of passing cars outside faded. The only thing remaining was the soft hum of the lights above them. I spent many years learning, he said. Then I spent a few years learning what mattered more. Victoria noticed the way he said it. There was no bitterness, no regret, only acceptance. That was unusual in her world. People who left success usually talked about what they lost. Ethan spoke about what he found. Later that day, Victoria watched Ethan leave the garage to pick up Lily from school. He waved goodbye to his co-workers, carried his old lunch bag, and walked toward his aging pickup truck. There were no cameras, no reporters, no applause, just a father going home to his daughter. Victoria stood quietly by her car, realizing something she had never expected. The man everyone overlooked was not trying to become important. He already was. He simply measured importance differently. And for the first time, the billionaire CEO who had everything began to question whether she had been searching for success in the wrong places. For the next several days, Victoria Sterling found herself thinking about a man she barely knew. That was something she was not used to. Her world moved quickly. Meetings lasted 15 minutes. Decisions were made in seconds. Problems were solved with teams of experts and millions of dollars. But Ethan Walker had shown her something different. He showed her that some answers were not found by adding more people to a room. Sometimes they were found by listening carefully to the person everyone else ignored. At Sterling Automotive Group headquarters, Victoria stood in front of a large glass wall overlooking the city. On her desk were reports from her engineers, financial projections, and the information she had gathered about Ethan. The file was small, almost too small. A simple work history, a small garage, a daughter he raised on his own. nothing that explained the knowledge he carried. Her assistant, Claire Morgan, walked into the office holding another document. "I found something unusual," Claire said. Victoria turned around. "About Ethan?" Claire nodded. "Yes. Before he moved to Willow Creek, there's a gap of several years in his records." Victoria looked at the document carefully. A gap in someone's history was usually where the most important story was hidden. "Can you find out what happened?" Victoria asked. Claire hesitated. "I can try, but it looks like he intentionally stepped away from everything." That answer stayed with Victoria. Intentionally. Ethan had not lost his place in the world. He had chosen another one. Meanwhile, at the small garage, Ethan continued his normal routine. He changed oil, repaired engines, and answered questions from customers who trusted him. But something was different now. People watched him more closely. They had seen the Porsche. They had seen the impossible problem he solved so calmly. A younger mechanic named Jake looked over from the workbench. "Ethan, how did you learn all of that?" Ethan smiled slightly. "A lot of reading, a lot of mistakes, a lot of time." Jake laughed. "That sounds like a simple answer for something that does not seem simple." Ethan placed the tool back in its place. The complicated things usually become simple when you understand the basics. It was the kind of answer Ethan always gave. Quiet, honest, never designed to impress. That evening, after closing the garage, Ethan picked up Lily from school. She ran toward him with a drawing in her hand. "Daddy, I made something for you." Ethan smiled as he looked at the picture. It showed the two of them standing beside an old truck under a bright blue sky. "I love it," he said. Lily looked up at him. "You should put it somewhere important." Ethan nodded. "I already know where." He placed the drawing carefully inside his truck, right beside the dashboard. It was worth more to him than any award he had ever received. Later that night, Victoria sat alone reviewing old company archives. Then she found something that made her stop. A photograph from years earlier. A young engineer standing beside a prototype vehicle. The name underneath made her breath pause. Ethan Walker, the same man from the small garage. The same man who had never mentioned his past. The same man who had quietly solved problems that challenged entire teams. Victoria stared at the image, realizing she had not discovered a mechanic with unusual talent. She had discovered someone who had walked away from greatness and never needed anyone to remind him who he was. The discovery changed something inside Victoria Sterling. Not because she had found a brilliant engineer hidden behind a mechanic's uniform, but because she finally understood the reason he disappeared. For years, she had believed success was something people fought to keep. Something people protected with pride, ambition, and endless effort. But Ethan Walker had done something she had never seen before. He walked away from recognition because something else mattered more. The next morning, Victoria drove to Willow Creek before sunrise. The small town was still quiet, the streets empty except for a few early workers heading to their jobs. She parked outside the garage and watched through the window as Ethan prepared for another day. There was no luxury, no private office, no team waiting for his instructions. Just a man opening a garage door, turning on the lights, and beginning his work. She stepped inside as Ethan looked up. "You came early," he said. Victoria held the old photograph in her hand. For a moment, she did not know what to say. "I found something," she finally answered. Ethan looked at the picture and became still. The expression on his face changed, not with anger or fear, but with the quiet feeling of someone remembering a chapter of life he had closed long ago. "I wondered when someone would find that," he said softly. Victoria placed the photograph on the counter. "Why did you leave?" The question was simple, but it carried years of curiosity. Ethan looked around the garage. The familiar tools, the old shelves, the place where he had rebuilt his life. "Because I needed to choose what mattered." Victoria listened carefully. Ethan took a slow breath. "When I was younger, I believed being valuable meant creating something everyone would notice. I thought my work had to be seen to matter." He looked toward a small picture of Lily sitting beside the cash register. "Then life changed. I became a father. Suddenly, the most important thing in the world was not a design, a company, or an award. It was being there for one person who needed me." Victoria felt the weight of those words. She had spent years building an empire, but she rarely allowed herself time to simply be present. Ethan was not running away from success. He had discovered a different definition of it. You could have returned, Victoria said. You could have had everything again. Ethan smiled gently. Maybe, but sometimes getting everything back means losing what you already found. The garage became quiet, the kind of quiet that carried meaning instead of emptiness. Victoria looked at him differently now. She no longer saw the mechanic who surprised her with knowledge. She saw a father who made sacrifices without asking anyone to praise him. She saw a man who had every reason to be proud, but chose humility instead. Later that afternoon, Victoria returned to her office with a different perspective. She looked at the city below her, the same buildings, the same companies, the same world she had always known. But something had shifted. She realized Ethan's greatest achievement was not the technology he created years ago. It was the person he became afterward. A man who lost a title but kept his character. A man who lost attention but kept his dignity. And Victoria knew that before she could truly understand Ethan Walker, she would have to understand the quiet strength that allowed him to let go of everything the world told him he needed. Victoria Sterling returned to Sterling Automotive Group with a feeling she had not experienced in years. It was not excitement from a new investment. It was not the pressure of a major business decision. It was something much quieter. Respect. She had met countless talented people throughout her career. Brilliant engineers, successful executives, visionary leaders. But Ethan Walker was different. His greatest achievement was not what he had created. It was what he had protected. His family, his values, his peace. The following week, Victoria invited Ethan to the company headquarters. She wanted him to review the new vehicle project one more time before the final presentation. When Ethan arrived, the atmosphere changed immediately. Employees who once ignored him now watched with curiosity. Some recognized him from the old company records. Others had only heard rumors about the quiet mechanic who had solved a problem their best engineers missed. Ethan noticed the attention, but remained the same. He simply walked through the building with the same calm expression he carried everywhere. Inside the design room, a group of engineers waited. Some looked nervous. Others looked uncertain. Victoria stood at the front of the room. "This is Ethan Walker," she said. "He has something important to share about this project." One engineer crossed his arms. "With respect, we already have a full team working on this." Ethan nodded. "I know, and that team has done impressive work." His response surprised everyone. He did not dismiss them. He did not claim he was better. He respected the effort they had already given. He walked toward the vehicle design displayed on the large screen. The goal was to create something powerful, Ethan said, but power without balance creates problems. The room became silent. He explained his ideas carefully, showing small improvements that could make the system more efficient and reliable. The engineers followed along, slowly realizing the simplicity behind his thinking. The answer had not been hidden in complicated formulas. It had been hidden in understanding the purpose of the machine. Victoria watched from the side of the room. She noticed something important. Ethan was not trying to return to his old position. He was not looking for a title. He was helping because he believed good work deserved to be completed. After the meeting, Victoria walked beside him through the quiet hallway. "You could have embarrassed them," she said. "You could have walked in here and reminded everyone that you knew more." Ethan smiled. "What would that fix?" Victoria looked at him. "Maybe your reputation." Ethan shook his head. "Reputation is what people think they know. Character is what you do when nobody is watching." Those words stayed with her. Outside the building, the city moved quickly. Cars passed. People rushed between meetings. Everyone seemed focused on proving their importance. But Ethan stood there calmly, carrying the same old lunch bag and checking the time because he needed to pick up Lily from school. Victoria watched him leave and realized something powerful. The man she once saw as ordinary had never been ordinary. He simply never needed the world to tell him his worth. And as Ethan drove back toward Willow Creek, Victoria understood that the quietest people often carry the stories that deserve to be heard the most. The day of the Sterling Automotive presentation arrived with a different kind of energy. The headquarters was filled with movement, quiet conversations, and the steady sound of people preparing for one of the biggest demonstrations in the company's history. Executives walked through the halls carrying documents. Engineers reviewed final details. Cameras were positioned for the official announcement. Everyone believed the moment would belong to the company's newest innovation. But no one knew the most important part of the day would come from a man who never asked to be noticed. Ethan Walker arrived early, just as he always did. He wore a simple jacket and carried the same calm expression he carried into the small garage every morning. Victoria noticed him standing near the vehicle display, studying the design with the same patience he had shown from the beginning. "Are you ready?" she asked. Ethan looked at the vehicle and smiled slightly. "The machine is ready. The question is whether people are willing to listen." Victoria understood exactly what he meant. In business, pride could sometimes become louder than truth. Inside the presentation hall, hundreds of guests gathered. Investors, engineers, and industry leaders waited as Victoria stepped onto the stage. She spoke about innovation, dedication, and the future of transportation. Then she introduced Ethan, a quiet man from Willow Creek, a single father, a mechanic. The room reacted with confusion. Some people whispered. Others looked surprised. A few wondered why a man without a corporate title was standing beside the CEO. Ethan walked forward without hesitation. He did not try to impress the audience. He simply explained the improvements he had suggested and why they mattered. "The best designs are not created to show how advanced they are," Ethan said. "They're created to serve the people who depend on them." The words were simple, but they reached everyone in the room. Then came the final demonstration. The vehicle system started exactly as planned. The performance was smooth. The technology worked better than expected. The engineers looked at each other with admiration. The investors leaned forward, impressed by the results. But the most powerful moment was not the machine. It was the silence afterward. The same people who had once seen Ethan as just a mechanic were now looking at him with completely different eyes. Victoria watched from the side of the stage. She saw what others finally saw. Ethan had never needed a title to prove his value. He had never needed applause to know his work mattered. After the presentation, one of the senior engineers approached him. "I owe you an apology," he said. "I judged you before understanding you." Ethan smiled. "Most people do. We all have moments where we learn to see differently." Later that evening, Victoria stood outside the building with Ethan as the city lights appeared across the horizon. "You know," she said quietly, "you changed more than this project." Ethan looked at her. "How?" "Victoria smiled. You reminded people that intelligence means very little without humility." Ethan looked toward the road where he would soon drive home to Lily. The world had finally recognized what he had known all along. True greatness does not demand attention. It earns respect through quiet actions, steady character, and the courage to remain kind even when nobody is watching. Several weeks passed after the presentation, but the moment people finally understood Ethan Walker did not disappear into headlines or public attention. He returned to Willow Creek just as he always had. The small garage welcomed him with the familiar smell of motor oil, the sound of tools resting on wooden shelves, and the quiet rhythm of another ordinary day. To the world, Ethan had become a story of unexpected brilliance. But to Lily, he was still just Dad, the man who packed her lunch every morning, the man who helped with homework at the kitchen table, the man who never missed a chance to tell her that she was the most important part of his life. One evening, as the sun lowered behind the quiet streets of Willow Creek, Ethan sat on the porch with Lily beside him. She held a drawing she had made at school. This time, it showed their old truck, the garage, and a woman standing beside them with a smile. Ethan looked at the picture and laughed softly. "Who is that?" he asked. Lily smiled. "That is Victoria. She looks happy here." Ethan looked at the drawing for a moment longer. He knew his daughter noticed things adults often missed. She saw kindness before status. She saw people before titles. Meanwhile, in the city, Victoria Sterling sat in her office looking at a decision that would shape the future of her company. She had offered Ethan a position with Sterling Automotive Group, a position that would bring back everything he had once walked away from. A respected title, a comfortable life, a place among the people who once admired his work. But when she asked him, Ethan gave an answer she never expected. "I appreciate the offer," he said, "but I do not want to become the person I was before." Victoria was quiet. "Why?" Ethan looked toward the window of the small garage where Lily was waiting for him. "Because that person was always trying to prove he mattered. I do not need to prove that anymore." Those words stayed with Victoria. She realized Ethan had found something many successful people spent their entire lives searching for: peace. The following weekend, Victoria visited Willow Creek. She did not arrive with a group of assistants or a schedule full of meetings. She came as herself. She helped at the community event, talked with neighbors, and spent time with Ethan and Lily. For the first time, she experienced a world where people did not care about her company or her wealth. They cared about who she was. As the evening ended, Victoria and Ethan stood near the garage watching the town lights appear one by one. "I used to think success meant reaching the top," Victoria said. Ethan smiled. "And now?" She looked at him. "Now, I think success means knowing what you are willing to protect when you get there." The quiet moment between them carried more meaning than any grand announcement. Ethan had not changed because people finally recognized him. He had stayed the same from the beginning. A father, a helper, a man with dignity who chose kindness when the world expected pride. And Victoria finally understood the truth that had been hidden in front of everyone all along. The greatest people are not always the ones standing in the spotlight. Sometimes they are the ones quietly holding everything together, waiting for the world to finally notice.